Afternoon all, and thank you for joining us. I'm Andrew Catchpole, editor of Harpers Wine and Spirit, and welcome to our SITT Roundtable, How to Forge the Best Relationship with Your Suppliers. For obvious reasons, we couldn't offer the physical tasting element of our specialist importers trade tastings today, but we can still bring you a virtual taste of the features that we normally run at these biannual gatherings for indie merchants and on-trade buyers. Joining me around the virtual table are Phil Innes of Loki Wines. Hi, Phil.
Hi.
Erik Laan of the Vineking.
Hello.
Julia Jenkins of Flagship Wines.
Hello.
Hi, Julia. And Miles Corish, MW from Milestone Wines.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Miles. And Miles, I was just saying a little earlier, unfortunately, we've had a fellow supplier have to pull out at the last minute. So you'll have to hold the supply side for the parade.
I'll do my best. I'll do my best.
Excellent. Okay, I'll dive in if you feel you're under attack at any point. Okay, so the idea for today's discussion is to look at how retail merchants and their suppliers can best work together to ensure the requirements of old, new, and evolved channels of business can best be capitalized upon and maximized for the benefit of all. Now, it's a topic that we visited before, both at Harpers and via our agile media stablemate Drinks Retailing magazine. But with the disruption of the pandemic and the economy in a parlous state, probably for some time to come, it seems apt to return to the subject once more. It's probably fair to say that it's never been more important for suppliers and retailers to ensure that the relationship is as well oiled as can be, as supportive and mutually beneficial in every possible way. Now, no business I know is perfect. No business relationship is perfect, and we're all human, but I'm also really keen today that rather than a sort of us and them divide, we really do investigate the positive ways in which common issues can be met and improved upon. Before we kick off, for you, the audience out there, we very much welcome input and questions. So please do use the Q&A function to ask any questions, and we'll endeavour to answer all, either as we go along or towards the end of the session. So to kick off, let's start perhaps with the broader picture. Probably one more for the merchants around the table, the indies around the table. Has there been any marked change in the frequency or range or breadth of your purchasing, or consolidation in the number of supplier business partners you deal with over the course of the pandemic? And I guess an additional question to that is how will it likely pan out into 2021 and beyond? Do you see any reduction or change? And I don't know, Erik, could we begin with you?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. We've seen, I think, actually a slimming down over the last year. I think mainly because we had a problem with, well, one, closing, opening, closing, opening. You're not quite sure what stocks are required. And then also the business changed so quickly. We moved on to online, became a lot more important. And so for us to find, because we always love doing the small little like supplies, it was more a question of logistical answers being required. And so we tapped in heavily to and also I think it was a question good with stocking. So a lot of these guys are wholesalers or into had vast need to help them back. As much as we'd love to find new interesting stuff, how do you find it? There was no fairs. There was, it's very, very difficult like that. So we kind of worked harder with the people we were already working with.
Okay, excellent. We lost, I think we got the sense of what you were saying, especially towards the end, Erik, but we've lost you a bit. Let's hope your connection it sort of improves a little along the way. Julia, any thoughts on the same question, really?
Fairly similar possibly to Erik, but I think, again, we have quite strong working relationships with our suppliers, and we needed them even more, I think, during lockdown, when we were fortunate enough to obviously sort of stay open and we were pretty busy. Initially it was quite hard. I think problems arose perhaps where suppliers had furloughed quite a lot of their team inevitably. And just trying to find the right person to speak to sometimes was a little bit difficult. But I think, once there was an understanding that, we were all going after the same objective, to sort of sell wine, then I think we worked out how to work together. Perhaps a few delays on delivery. We're lucky being in St Albans that we have next day quite a lot, but that might slip to another 24 hours. But I think we still had quite a strong relationship. As Erik said, sourcing new wines, you had to plan a little bit more and just try and have good communication, and speak to people, and work as closely as you can, really. And I think we came out of it quite strongly.
So have you looked to keep your range pretty much as was in terms of breadth and so on?
I think there've been a few changes because we found that people were buying actually sort of throughout our range. People had more time to spend looking at our website and trawling through and finding what we think are some of the more interesting wines that we were used to hand selling through the shop, for example. We realised that we were actually reordering those far more frequently, and that encouraged us to sort of spread our range out in those areas. So that was a big positive, but not in terms of new suppliers, but really much more sort of just finding wines that we could add to the range if certain things were out of stock, and inevitably there were issues with stock coming in and out. Then it just gave us the opportunity to find new things and introduce them. You had to be fairly quick on your feet just to keep everything sort of going, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So perhaps more difficult to get hold of people because of furlough and disruption, but at the same time needing clearer and faster communication than ever, as things chopped and changed quite fast. So,
and I think once suppliers realised that the independents, were moving sort of quite quickly during the pandemic, then they rose to the challenge as well. And I think amidst it all, then it was fairly well organised.
We'll come to Miles in a second, just to hear from sort of the supplier side of it. But of course, as indie merchants, many of you are also suppliers wholesaling. And I mean, Phil, to take Loki, then as a sort of extreme, you've got a sort of triumvirate of channels, I suppose, or functions. So as I can see, your lovely shelves of wine behind you, which are normal, so for walking into the shop, but also I believe you wholesale, and obviously you've got a hybrid model as well. So that must have led to some thinking and adjustment quite rapidly, I suppose, to trying to deal with all those three triumvirate of facets of the business.
Yeah, I mean, we also focus quite strongly on an event side as well. So you usually would do in a given week probably about 5-6 corporate events plus 4 at least of our organized events a week, and so there's a massive income stream lost for us there, and also an opportunity to get through some volume. But yeah, very quickly we decided to adapt to do more online tastings. For example, this weekend actually we've got 280 people signed up, and it's still not over. We're hoping to get over the 300 mark for that. So we've definitely, although it's been a tough year, and we'd rather be open, and I'm sure that's the same for Julia and Erik. Would rather be open fully and have people on site. It's actually opened up a lot of opportunities that we didn't have before, and I'm quite optimistic going into the future actually that that a lot of our businesses will not carry on. I don't doubt for a moment that the hybrid model is going to still be incredibly popular. I think people are desperate to go out for a drink. When I talk to my customers, they're already wanting to book tables, they're wanting to come in. So I don't see any problem with that side going forward. People are desperate to go out, but I definitely see that there will be a continuation of the online virtual tasting side. I mean, we got a little bit of a sneak preview of it in the November when things got eased up in the summer before the November lockdown, where yes, we got drops in numbers for our virtual tastings down to 100, 130 people every week, but yeah, that's still a significant number of people. It's still a good outlet for us, and it's a sign that even when things do open up, I think there'll still be an appetite for people to enjoy tasting in the comfort of their home rather than have to go out to somewhere.
Yeah, well, I think we'll come back to that in a second as well, because we'll look at how what the additional demands are of sort of evolving side. Miles, from a supplier perspective, what was your experience as a company? What were you finding whether the additional demands may have been? What was placed on you by your accounts and customers?
I think we found we were a bit surprised by the increase in volume. So I think that took us by surprise. And I think we also, as Julia said, we sort of almost were forced as a defensive move to sort of adjust our staffing level. So it put a bit of pressure on the facilitation of orders and the getting back to people, that sort of thing. I think we also noticed a real collaboration with our customers. There was a real understanding that we were sort of felt like we were all in it together. Much more so probably than before. And this extended through almost to people saying, look, if it helps, we're doing really well. Do you want us to pay up front for the order? That sort of thing. So we had some really, we had some surprises in terms of the way our customers almost embraced us, if you like. And that's followed through. Made it a little bit more difficult to develop some new products because we had a number of new products in the mix, and obviously whereas we'd normally pop in the car and go out and see people, that was obviously off the cards. So we had to think a bit more creatively as to how we could engage with customers and try and find new ones with new, and we invested heavily in sending a lot of samples out to people, just to try and see if we could expand the net. But overall, I think there's been a lot of change, but I think, like Phil said, some of that change is here to stay. I think, if anything, it's sort of, we're very excited about the future, in terms of coming out of this. But it was a challenging time, but rewarding all the same.
Can I just jump in there, Andrew? Sorry.
Phil, yes, far away.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, just following on from what Miles said, is that a lot of the suppliers that I think we did very, very well with in coming out of this were the suppliers that were really proactive and just kind of wanted to sell things and wanted to get through. And we ended up doing a hell of a lot of business with those particular suppliers. And then it was kind of almost like 4 months down the line, we had other suppliers just catching up, the people who had furloughed everyone and decided to hibernate for a few months, and then thought, oh, actually, there's some business to be had. And I definitely found that a lot of suppliers that did that kind of lost the momentum, and I'd already got all the online stuff. It is more of an effort to do stuff for online. We need to photograph everything. We need to write descriptions. We need to put it online. It's not as easy as just whacking it on the shelf and putting a price tag on it. So it felt like more of a commitment. And I think those suppliers who weren't proactive at the beginning, I think probably the figures will show that they lost out overall.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to pick Julia?
Yeah, I think we felt the same. And we've had some very proactive, very positive support from a lot of suppliers. We, like most people in the trade, lost our wholesale business, as did all the suppliers. And so, it was interesting to see those that did respond and actually make the most of an opportunity, which it became. We could have sat and just felt really, responded, as I think a lot of people had the right to do when businesses closed. I think it showed, those that are willing to just make contact and keep that sort of positive contact going. And I think, we would respond very well to it as well. It's always a two-way thing. And we've had some very good results, in terms of looking at our figures for 2020 versus 2019. And I think that's sort of proof how, we did actually try and get behind it. Fortunately, we had the website already up and running. And we were able to, we'd been selling tickets for all our events anyway online. So you're able to transfer that into, sort of everything being online, and yeah, really sort of channeling effort. As Phil saying, it is almost double the effort, isn't it? Just to try and ensure that everything is there, and that everybody can access it easily. So yeah.
I suppose that's some interesting points you're both making there. I mean, one of the common threads I've heard through the whole pandemic period is there are those who may be on furlough or sadly have lost employment, but those who are working have been working harder than they've ever worked before. And there's some sort of nods around the panel there. So I'm just wondering if I suppose the question would be, is it possible for those who have gone the extra mile and continue to go the extra mile into restrictions for a second time and lockdown, and then into a third lockdown, and so on, for a much longer period than I think many of us actually perhaps naively didn't really expect for this whole saga so far. Can that be kept up, do you think, on both sides of the relationship, or do we just sort of go back to something a bit not lazy but a bit closer to 2019 and normal? You sort of mean, will that intensity of relationship continue and that coming together? And I think, Miles, you were also suggesting that I think the trade has pulled together remarkably. I mean, it's been extraordinary to watch and really heartening. But it's but do you think those more intense relationships will continue?
I'd like to think so, because I think we, from our point of view, our sort of range extensions tend to come from two things. One is talking to our customers and listening to what they want. Sometimes it's we might come across something that we feel is interesting, and hopefully we show it to customers and hope that they actually share the enthusiasm. But I think that collaboration from our point of view, especially with I know we're touching on it later, but some of the issues this year with shipping and getting hold of goods is not as easy as it used to be, and explaining and communicating that with the customer base to say, look, I know you desperately want this product, but no one can get a container out of Australia for 8 weeks, so we all have to wait. So it's that sort of relationship, fluid relationship. I think we're certainly planning on having that continuing, and in fact, from an infrastructure point of view, we're putting sort of all sorts of systems in place to sort of make sure that that's managed in the future, So yeah, from our point of view, I can't see it going back to almost a reactive scenario where you just wait for sales to come in and process orders. We certainly want to be more, in partnership with our customers, and we've sort of always viewed it that way, but it's been accentuated by, I think, the last 12 months.
Yeah, I mean, a slightly grim question to have to ask, but I suppose for all of you, are we expecting to see further consolidation among suppliers, and is that something that is of concern?
From my point of view, I can't speak for other suppliers. I mean, there are, as some we've touched upon, I suppose there's certain people who have maybe not adapted as well as others. So I'm not sure. I mean, I think there are a lot of people that came into this very heavily geared to one sector or another, and I'd like to think that there's room for everyone. But inevitably there's always some sort of consolidation that goes on. I think from a supply point of view, certainly it's putting an emphasis on cash flow at our end, because whereas we used to think, oh, we'll buy a pallet of that, that's interesting, and a pallet of this and that sort of thing. Those wines mightn't be as attractive when you factor in the new shipping regime and the new charges. So it might force a certain condensing of available SKUs out there, and through natural selection that might put a few people backwards in terms of their ability to trade. But I'd like to think that we've come through so far, and hopefully a number of people still come through the other end, really.
Well, I think we've neatly segged there. Actually, I have a question from Peter Monk. Hi, Peter. About how your buying discussion may have changed since Brexit. Have you stopped buying direct from Europe? What are the cost implications for you? So I think we could address the shipping issues and additional kind of red tape and challenges and costs from Brexit. I mean, let's how is that likely to continue to impact? Or do you feel there'll be more resolution as people get used to what's going on down the line? And then we'll open that out to the merchants as well.
So. Well, from a Milestone perspective, it is impacting already in the sense that there are real cost increases. So, I think it's quite well known on our side of the fence that the freight charges alone have gone up. The freight component of shipping things as from Europe, somewhere around 35% increase. And plus then you've got the red tape, as you put it, with all the associated import clearances and that sort of thing, which adds, depending on who you use in the shipping side of things, 110 to 140 pounds per consignment. So I think it's easily amortized over, if you're shipping a pallet of Pinot Grigio, it's not so bad. Sorry, a container of Pinot Grigio. If you're trying to find a boutique wine in Italy or Spain, then it becomes an issue because you're looking at double, if not more, the actual shipping component. So it's proving challenging. I think, we are certainly trying to find ways around that. We're trying to, see what we can absorb ourselves in terms of the costs. I think we've always been, we haven't really hedged on the currency front either. So, there's not the sort of the current upswing in the pound's helpful, but it's not like we've been using 1-to-1 in terms of the euro. So, there's not the sort of extra room to hide these expenses. So I think there'll be some, we have to look always to make sure that whatever we're offering is at its new price value for money. And if we think that, it still is, we'll bring it in. If there's any sort of confusion about that, it's too risky to invest, thousands of euros in something that may not work. So, I think there will be challenges. For us, touch wood at the moment, we're still persevering with the products we've got because, we've done the numbers and they work. But interestingly, for new things we're looking at, we're putting some of those, on the back burner just to see how it all pans out.
It's interesting because the contrast with our opening conversation this morning, my colleague who edits, Sonia Hook, who edits Drinks Retailing, was in conversation with Jancis and asked her, what are your tips for ongoing trends in terms of buying wine, in terms of what's exciting, etc. And she mentioned a couple of favorites of hers, Greece and Portugal, in terms of value, as in not cheap, but as in real value and really exciting wines. And I think we probably all agree, no question there. But I mean, and let's throw this over to some of you indies, are they not going to be the kind of wines that might be the icing on the cake, those things you can get really excited about? But in terms of bringing them over, you're likely to want to buy in small quantities, the more sort of esoteric parts of your range and so on. What do you think the implications are for those parts of your portfolio that actually make independence really exciting? I mean, who would like to pick that up?
Well, I'll happily say that for us, they are the little gems that you find on the shelves. And back in the day, you used to go down to Millesine Bio, find a producer, really great wines, ship in a pallet, and on that pallet he's got 7 different, lines. The cost of that now for someone like myself to do, I need to ship 3 pallets to just about, make that worthwhile. So I'm not going to ship 3 pallets of amazing little Douro Rosé, which is only grown on one tiny little part of a mountain, because you've got to ship 3 pallets. And so I think what's going to happen is we're increasingly going to rely upon our suppliers here in the UK to actually have those little gems and nuggets that we can put onto our shelves. But one of the things that we haven't really mentioned yet is, for us, what we discovered is the massive rise in online, and the implications of online is brand management. And it's critical that whoever we're dealing with makes sure that their products don't get discounted down by people operating on 15%. And that for me is one of the things that we used to always go and buy direct ourselves as much as we could, or through the independents, was we'd have unique products, and that was cool. But even things which we're offering 20% off of one of the big guys, someone else is offering that at 5% margin. And I think category management, and this I think is the most important aspect for me of relationship between me and my supplier, that when I talk to them, they say it's not going there, it's not going there, it's only here, and it has to be they're like controlling things like that. But it's a bit like being how you sell certain types of jeans in a boutique shop. Okay, you are sort of accepted to be, you're good enough to sell them, and I think that needs to possibly come in a little bit.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So before, I mean, part of, I think, the ethos in indie is you walk in as you would with a good wine list in a restaurant, and you don't expect to see necessarily what you might see on the shelves of a bigger volume retailer, but also to flip that around from the business's point of view, obviously. You're not going to get as good a deal either as a big retailer. But what I'm suggesting then is, because of the boom in online, this has become ever more important for you guys, because of that price comparison thing. As simple as that, really, isn't it? So,
yeah.
So you need more exclusivity, but against the backdrop of it perhaps being slightly more challenging to maintain those exclusive wines at a reasonable price for your customers. Is that a fair assessment?
Pretty much so. That's okay.
Phil or Julio, did I pick up on that? Any comments?
I mean, one of the things I would like to follow on from that is that there is a slightly worrying trend, and I've noticed it with, I'm not going to mention suppliers, but certain generally larger suppliers who have their own e-commerce platform. And I've noticed throughout the lockdown, probably because they wanted to liquidate a load of stock, that they are selling, wines at below our cost price, which obviously they can do. And I think if that trend continues, I'd be very, very worried. And I think Erik's completely right. We need to have, you can't price control and stuff like that, but there needs to be a sensible discussion about, what prices are going to be, things are going to be sold at for certain products.
Yeah. Miles, can we bring you in? I mean, I'll ask you to comment on other suppliers, but just maybe a general view.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been, and the team here knows that we've always been very aware of channel management, and very aware of I think the requirement of, and the quite right requirement of our customers to make good money on our wines. We have in the past been approached by certain people who we know could have compromised that for our customers, and we have chosen, to not have the stock available, if you like, or be out of stock on certain things, because I did not want to expose our indies against someone who I knew was going to, as Erik says, probably sell it for 15%, and that sort of thing. I think with the transparency that's happening, throughout life in general, I think it's really important that suppliers sort of get a grip on who's going to sell their products. There are suppliers I know who are friends of mine, who have an attitude, and it's understandable as well. Look, we'll just sell it to anyone, whoever wants it, that's it. And we can't control things, we can't, nor should we legally, all that sort of thing. I understand that view, but I think we've got to be a bit more structured, because anyone can give something away. It doesn't take much in terms of to say your USP is I'm the cheapest. It takes a lot to actually engage your customer base and keep things interesting, keep your blogs going, keep your web pages changed, all that sort of stuff that indies do to get those loyal customers. And if you're going to flick a wine to someone and it's something that they've never heard of and you suggesting it, and then only, to find that wine, sort of 10 to 15% less somewhere because someone's just being lazy in terms of giving it away, I don't think that bodes well for long-term product growth and continuity of brands within the sector.
Yeah, no, I think fair point. Julia, anything to add to that? Or?
Well, in addition, I think as well, as you've alluded to, the depth and breadth of range is very, very important for an independent, because that's where the interest and the excitement lies for customers. And therefore, given that is unravelling and costs are increasing, and it's difficult to maintain that shipping. And I think Erik said, we are reliant on suppliers, and I'm hoping that not so much range rationalisation, but being able to cope with some change and adapting the range and finding, suppliers that do have these little gems, some that we're working with already, hopefully, and who may, find the opportunity, given that there may be demand on them to offer these things, and maybe they don't at the moment, to actually sort of start making some changes in terms of how we buy those. It'll be interesting to see. I think it's going to be a period of transition, and the most adaptable and those that can change, I think will have a degree of success. There is sales sort of trade to factor in as well, who are perhaps not inflexible, but it's the change of range isn't quite as easy and straightforward as it is on the retail shelf for obvious reasons. So there'll be some different challenges, I think, for different companies depending on the proportion of their trade on the different streams of income.
And what if, I suppose a key question is, we've talked about increased costs, and especially costs that aren't going to affect someone who's buying large volumes of a given wine brand, but are going to impact more directly on those smaller shipments. And this has obviously been widely reported. What's the initial early sense into this year post the end of Brexit transition as to where those costs are being picked up? And are they being shared fairly between producers, supplier, and retailer? Is that an unfair expectation? What are your initial what are your sort of initial impressions, experiences, not impressions, of what's happening there?
Well, from a supply point of view, because we always try and get the best price from the suppliers, from our producers, if you like. I was talking to one last night, and there's all sorts of, without going into the FCA versus sort of ex-sellers shipping, etc. Understandably, from their end, a lot of them are saying, look, Miles, you get the best price. You've battered us down over the years. We can't wear some of these charges that you want us to wear. So if there are extra charges, unfortunately, you're going to have to carry the can on those. So I think those, some of them are being helpful because we're saying, look, instead of doing 2 or 3 pallets, can we look at 4 or 5 pallets? But, will you help us out with a little bit more extension on terms? So therefore they can share a bit of pain that way. And they're being, to be fair, they're also very, very keen to help. So there is something that you can do on that basis. But I think anyone whose price sort of on the supply front doesn't change at all this year, probably sort of either is having a bit of a punt, or it has had such successful margins previously that they can afford to sort of wear some of those extra costs. But we're trying to sort of get rid of some of them, but unfortunately you can't. If you work off low margins as a business and it costs you quite a bit more, you've got to put something on, if you know what I mean. Yeah, no,
absolutely. I don't know, Erik, do you want to
yeah, for me, we did our maths when we spoke to one of the shippers, and it's interesting, some of the shippers, so that's where the cost is coming to us direct. If we're shipping it in, it's a straight increase in freight. It's the EX1 form, but that varies. I've had one quote for £110, another person mentioning £68. Okay, I've had admin fees thrown at me of 52 and 60. I've had 25 quid if I want it into bond, and it seems to be that a lot of these guys can't actually be bothered with the business necessarily, and that's also the word I've had with a few other people who deal more on Miles's side of the business as well too. And I think that essentially it's working out, it's an extra £1 per bottle. That's what we're looking at. And by the time it lands with me, and I, of course, I can't just, much as I'd love to be charitable, I've got to pass it on to the customer. That's just the way it works. And so everything's going to go up. So my solution is we can have a remain price and maybe a leave price. and then people can choose which way they want. It's either £2 off or £2 on. There we go.
would be yeah, an intriguing one if we could run sort of parallel universe straight down the middle of Britain. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure in the longer term it would be good for much sort of healing and progression. But yeah, I think it's a point well made, basically. So I think sticking with buying from, whether buying direct or buying from established suppliers, new suppliers. Another element perhaps to bring in is sort of buying groups as well. What's happening to the role, would you predict, of buying groups? Are they going to become more important for independent merchants? And how does that stack up against suppliers, some of whom you may have sort of gone back to a little more because of the challenges of buying direct as well? So what are buying groups and maybe even unofficial grouping together to buy, we'll put it that way as well? Do any of you use buying groups? I mean, Phil, Julia, Erik?
Yeah, well, I'm a member of the Vindies, as is Phil, and I mean I use them an awful lot. And then it's also trying to find people in Europe who operate like that too. So I found a few guys in France who do groupage and that sort of thing as well. So that's how, because again, it comes down to, especially as we're now online, everything is super competitive, and there are people who want to operate on 10%. We have to find unique products. So working on buying groups, working on that basis is, I think, increasingly important for the independents anyway.
I think the same. Yeah, I think exactly the same. But certainly for the short term, I definitely see an increase in, certainly from my business, for using UK agents and just cutting out a lot of the hassle and the stock holding and the lead times. We've drastically cut our stock holding down here over the last year, and I don't see it suddenly jumping up to the levels in 2019 where I wanted kind of pallets of every wine in supply. I don't see that happening for a very long time now, and actually it's quite nice to be able to get those regular drops of small orders, keep our stock level down, preserve cash flow, and I certainly see me doing that more over the next, say, 6 months than buying from abroad.
So where does that leave our specialist importers, which our SITT specialist importer trade tastings take their name from? So how will the SITT crew, they're likely to sort of gain or lose in 2021 and beyond, those style of suppliers, those size, shape suppliers?
Well, from my point of view, I think the tastings are very important. I think the getting back to the groupage side, which Erik touched upon, that's where the problem is as well, in the sense that we used to, in Spain in particular and in Italy, collaborate a lot with suppliers to say, can you get that those 2 pallets to that producer, and we're all going to collect from this spot and that sort of thing. Though, whilst there's a bit of saving in the freight element of doing that, now with these extra declarations, you're having to actually incur that 110 to 140 pounds per producer, even if you're doing that consolidation. So I guess the ability to do that has been compromised. So, but from our point of view, the tastings and those sort of profiling events are a great way of getting physically to see people, having a chat with them. I think if anything, this pandemic's shown that we are a social species, and we do crave for that sort of one-to-one and catching up in person. So I'm looking forward to some of those coming back. But certainly there's things that we've learned from the way we can dispatch samples and the variety of ways of doing that, can be enhanced by what we now do. But I think they're not always going to be at the expense of physical events, I wouldn't have thought.
Yeah, this is an interesting one to pick up on. I mean, any other views? I mean, Julia, what thoughts for?
I think there'll be some consolidation inevitably, and there'll be some rationalisation as to the suppliers that companies use as well. And it could be just a very positive time for actually reviewing, the range for us. I think that we sell, have a look at where the gaps might lie, because the demands on the business have changed somewhat, as I was alluding to earlier. But I think it will be very much, you know, as ever really, you know, will become very, very important in terms of, you know, direct shipping and that sort of thing. We don't belong to the independents, but we belong to the Ralston buying group. That's really for our own label, sort of exclusive label lines, which works very, very well between us. And then I know that, you know, there is some goodwill amongst members of the group to do some buying together where possible, just to make the most of different opportunities. Although we don't always buy obviously the same products, but you know, there are times when you can actually sort of think, how can we make this work, rather than just going it alone all the time.
Yeah, no, of course, yeah, exactly. Okay, our audience being hello, lovely audience. Being quite quiet today, actually. This morning we had a lot of questions trickling in. I don't know if there's anything that you want to put your hand up for. We've got a few minutes left, so would welcome some more questions or even comments. So what else can we say about the buyer-supplier relationship? My final question really was sort of centered on the increasing hybridization in terms of off and on-trade mix. Now, I'm quite intrigued looking back with a significant number of independent merchants now having some form of hybrid element to their operation. Is it a first question, I suppose? Do you foresee? I mean, I think Phil, you touched upon it, but do you foresee that as continuing across the independent merchant sector? And then my actual question will be: does that place additional requirements on your suppliers and what you expect from them? So I suppose first off, are we going to see sort of further hybridization, and indeed with all the other elements that are bolted on, more online activity, you know, perhaps more fluid and different events, etc., as we move forward? Who would want to pick that up? I mean, Phil.
Yeah, I definitely see a lot more of that occurring. I already know that there are quite a few plans for other people to move to a hybrid model. But I generally think that online is here to stay as well. I think we've all embraced it really well, and even when people want to go back to the shop, and I think it depends what sort of customer you have, but a lot of our customers do want that hand sell and that personal information, and it's what makes us very different to going to Waitrose or something like that. So I definitely think we're going to get a lot of those customers back, but hopefully we can keep enough who want to, in particular, do kind of a local delivery side, because obviously there's a cost effectiveness side doing the kind of volumes we're doing at the moment locally, but the instant your local deliveries drop down and you're doing, you know, 30 a day rather than 100 a day, that's when it starts becoming less cost effective to pay drivers and that sort of thing. So it is, yeah, it's definitely, it'll be an interesting next few months, I think.
Okay, and the question from John Chapman. Hi, John, Oxford Wine Co. And John's asking, or saying, there are increased costs in importing, but given you are never going to fix RRPs, surely direct importing specialist lines is now even more essential for a genuine indie. Should SITT suppliers be guiding indies in this type of venture? Well, Miles, what do you think?
I mean, I think on certain volume core items, that sort of thing, I think, you know, it possibly makes sense. I think there's always the balance between it's the cash flow, it's the net gain at the end of the day. So it's you know, how much space, how much storage you want to pay for, how much money you want to tie up towards what net benefit at the end of the day. And on certain products, I'm sure it will work and would be a benefit. I think on certain maybe more interesting products, it's slightly more problematic because there's inevitably more funds tied up, and the wines maybe don't move through as quickly. So, you know, I think I can understand where John's coming from, and I certainly don't think it's not worthwhile. You know, even as a supplier, we obviously do facilitate that with our customers. You know, if they they do want to buy direct anyway, a number of them. But I think it really, there's got to be a sweet spot, I think, in terms of turnover rates as well as, you know, funds employed, I think, to make it worthwhile.
Yeah. Do any of our indies want to comment on that? Is there anything to add to that from your perspective? No worries if not.
It's not very easy to find things that you can sort of ship on that basis. If you even do one pallet, you've got to hit 3 to make the money work now, and that means that it's prohibitive. And then also with the organic rubbish coming in later on, how to be, you know, certified organic to ship organic wines and all this sort of stuff, it's just going to add further and further costs to it as well too. So this is where I think the guys from SITT actually will do well, because, you know, I want those little bright gems on my shelves and I can't ship them.
Yeah. Okay. No. Fair enough. And I think just looking at time and moving towards maybe summing up a little, we've covered a lot of ground. I think we've covered some really interesting points. I've got a question from Michael Millington, which segues really, really neatly. Thank you, Michael, with what was going to be my in summary question. And Michael's simply asked, what is the key thing you look for in a new supplier? Range, credit, info, MOQ, question mark. So we would do just a little round of the houses. And Julia, what do you look for in a new supplier?
All of those, but also a willingness to understand my business and take time to, you know, work out how we might work. Having done a little bit of groundwork beforehand, and then, you know, being able to have a meaningful discussion as to what might be the best fit, if anything.
Okay, thanks, Julia. Phil, thoughts from your end? Anything
yeah, absolutely. All of the above. I think, you know, I still believe in that personal relationship, and a lot of the time, you know, our best sales people, our best reps are the ones that, you know, aren't too pushy, know the business. So, you know, we're all really pressed for time, and actually it's really great when a supplier comes in to me and has a selection of wines to try, and they know my business, they know exactly the sort of wines that I want to stock, and it's perfect. They bring 12 wines, I stock 10 of them because they knew exactly the sort of wine I'm looking for. I mean, taking the effort to do that rather than just kind of scattergun approach where I'll bring the same wine to everyone I'm seeing today, no real thought behind it, and then you wonder why you get no listings or one listing. And actually sometimes that personal effort goes a long way, I think.
I think it's crucial in you know, most business, but this is an especially, I think, people-driven business, isn't it? And those relationships are really key. Erik, has it all been said, or is there something?
To be honest, I agree with both exactly what Julia says and Phil. And to finish that conversation off with your supplier, they've got to be flexible enough to do a deal. Okay, because that's what we want. We want the deal, and we want the right deal. We have that discussion with them. Then don't talk to your boss. Don't do this. Make the deal there and then we can go and get selling. And that's what we're all after.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, nice rounding up of that. Miles, sitting top left of my screen as the supplier. So what responses? I know that Milestone Wines already does all of those things and does them well. So
we try. I mean, in terms of, I mean, from finding, I guess, new suppliers for us, if you like, or new producers. I mean, I think just taking a different tact on that front. I mean, it comes down to similar things and that we've mentioned on the supply front. So, you know, very much we're more interested in, you know, if I taste something at a show somewhere, or if I get samples, I want to know that it's not just a flash in the pan. You know, is this a producer that's going to be delivering each year, or we think it will? What's the consistency like in terms of the pricing? You know, we like to think we can judge value for money, you know, and that's not always as just surrounding cheap, you know. So and if those things are met, and also, you know, we think it's sort of different or over delivering, we'll have the confidence to spend the money to bring it in, you know, and hopefully that resonates with our customers, you know, and we'd like to think that that's, you know, that's what we're getting known for, I guess. But yeah, I think there's loads of opportunist sources where we get given things it's a very good price. You look at it, you have a think, and we don't feel it's right for us. You know, it might commercially be viable at a very cheap price, but it just doesn't add enough value, if you like, for us in terms of the quality and the wine, the overall package to bring it in. So I think, you know, I guess similar to, you know, for finding wine as it is to working with our customers, you know, for the indies.
So it's in a sense, I suppose we've come around to a conclusion. I've just jotted down, you know, personal touch, taking the time to understand your business, over delivering and delivering real value at the end of the day. So are the key things, and they always have been, of course, but perhaps, you know, especially through this year and through some difficult times, more important than ever, which I suppose was really the sort of, you know, starting point of this discussion. So well, I think we've covered some really good ground. I hope for you, the audience out there, it's been interesting and will spark sort of further conversation and thought and debate, and perhaps even just help people sort of think about and hone and smooth out any parts of that relationship that could be improved upon. It's been really fantastic seeing you all on the panel. Shame we can't see the audience. It's great that we can do these things via Zoom and so on, but it's actually so much nicer being in a real room, and then we can gather together and chat and ask questions afterwards. So I think I'll sort of wrap up there. For the audience, well, and indeed the panelists, there's one more webinar today, which actually pre-recorded from a couple of days ago, which kicks off at 3:15. It's Building Back Better, Rebooting the On-Trade for 2021, which is obviously an on-trade focused session, which we ran in partnership with Trade Hospitality. Recently launched the Trade Hospitality app. And there we've got Stephen Finch of Vagabond, Karen Gokani of Harpers, Des from D&D London, and Adam Handling of Handling Restaurants, and Steve Pinot of L'Atelier du Vin in my hometown of Brighton, who are discussing how best to ensure that the on-trade can sort of maximise through its day-to-day operation revenues and so on, as it kind of opens in a limited fashion at a very difficult time for that sector. So hopefully some of you will tune in for that. But otherwise, thank you very much. Thank you, Miles, for joining us and holding the supplier corner. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Phil, and thanks, Erik. It's really good to see you. It's been too long, but touch wood soon at an event with a glass of wine and real people will be good. So okay, good to see you all. Thank you very much.